Всем привет и с возвращением. I recently picked up this Rakurs 1P76 Optic as payment for some work that I did. And I noticed that on the internet there's not a whole lot of good information about this particular optic in terms of how it works in a practical shooting environment. RussianOptics.net has a very good review on the optic if you're interested in learning about its durability, some of its background information, how it fits on your AK. That's all well and good, but I think some of the quirks that it has are only going to show up in the context of a practical environment. I'm not going to talk too much about the quirks at this point because we are going to do some tests, and I want to save a lot of the words until after we've done the tests and we actually have some legitimate experience and information to work off of. So that's why we have what we have here today. So we have our Polish AKM, slightly overgassed, we have our Cobra, and we have our Rakurs. So the purpose of all this is we're going to first establish a baseline with iron sights on the Polish AKM. Then we have our Rakurs and our red dot. My theory is that because of its particular quirks, the Rakurs is going to be slower in our course of fire than the conventional red dot is. And this Cobra is about as conventional red dot as you can get in terms of Russian optics. So with that said, we are going to take all of these items out to the range in our course of fire. We'll talk more about what our specific tasks to complete are when we get there. And I'm curious to see what will happen because I have no idea what our tests will show. And I hope that you are as interested to find out how this Rakurs performs on the clock as I am.
Let's take a look at the course that I'm using to test these optics. There are 3 positions that we're going to be shooting from. The third one has an improvised barricade that you'll be shooting through. And you run through each of the stations 3 times. There is a mini IPSC target at 100 meters. You'll be taking 1 shot per station. More than 1 shot would be a better test, however, I simply don't feel like expending the ammo in this climate when 760x39 is between 35 and 40 cents a round. However, simply taking 1 shot should still give us a good idea of how easy it is to use the optic when aiming at a target that is fairly hard to see. It is unpainted and in the shadow from 3 different positions under stress and while moving around. I'll be narrating some of what doesn't come across in video here. First, regarding the shooting stance that I'm in, the Slav squat, I find it very comfortable and very quick to get in and out of. You need the flexibility for it, which is why it doesn't really suit most Americans. When I go over to this barricade, the distinct advantage iron sights have over any sort of optic is they sit very low over the bore, especially compared to Russian optics. However, a big disadvantage is that they can be sometimes much more awkward to use in awkward shooting positions since you have to get your head right in line with everything in order to get a correct sight picture and thus hit the target. The weather seemed to conspire to make this run extremely good, as I had very little wind, relatively speaking, compared to the other runs. As a result, I was able to get more accurate shots without the wind buffeting my gun back and forth. And that's time finishing in 2:04. We're using the Cobra for this one. It is as generic a red dot as you can get as far as Russian optics are concerned. it'll tell us whether the Rakurs, which is really competing with red dots, is going to be useful as a one-time scope. Here I get a malfunction that does increase my time probably about 5 seconds, mostly because I don't notice right away. I'm not sure what caused it, but it clears immediately. I don't believe it's a gas issue. If anything, this rifle is overgassed, but it's not overgassed enough to the point of causing malfunctions. So this is where my brain actually turns off. Usually when I'm shooting, it's no thoughts, head empty. I do not think. And this comes across when I go here. I literally could have just gone to the left more and had enough clearance to get the sight in. Instead, I decide to turn it to the side. That really, this is probably what really impacts my time to the greatest degree, is because you video game people won't know this, but you have to have very different holds when you're aiming when you're turning the gun left or right on its side. I was almost a full target width, aiming a full target width to the left in order to hit those shots when the gun was on its side. Right now it's taken me a long time to make these shots because the wind has picked up even further, and believe it or not, just the wind going across your gun in your hand really makes it difficult. Basically what I'm having to do is sort of snatch the shot the moment my red dot appears to be over the target. Once again, we're delayed by the bore sight distance and trying to get my face into position. The Cobra has probably more parallax than some of the better American optics, and as a result, I have to get my face aligned very well. We are now well beyond the time of the iron sights run, and we still have 2 more positions to reach. Once again, I forget to activate my brain and decide to tilt the gun on its side instead of literally just moving slightly to the left where I have more clearance. In this case, because it was so difficult to get the right holds, I try to hold it vertically and try to just sort of guess where I think the target is, even though I literally can't see the target. Because the board is in the way, I quickly realize that's not going to work. Okay, for the last run we have our Rakurs, which is kind of the whole subject of this video. Curious to see how it performs given the Cobra did so badly. When you see me peeking around the scope right there, it's because I actually just like straight up can't see the target. It's very difficult to see in the first place. Yeah, sorry about the focus. Working on that. We're working on getting a good camera setup for this kind of thing. I literally can't see the target, and then when you add the slight distortion that Rakurs puts on the image, things get very difficult. Just to be clear, the Rakurs is a 1x sight, and in the center of the sight, it is perfectly 1x. It has very nice optical quality, very clear glass. However, around the rim of the image, it gets slightly distorted. Thus, when you're aiming with both eyes, as you should be in order to get the goodest sight picture, it very much confuses your head, and you can get this weird sort of double vision effect. As a result, when you combine that weird double vision with the fact that the target is very hard to see, you have a lot of trouble trying to use this optic in those circumstances. Keep in mind that most targets that you will be engaging in a practical context will not be, wearing bright pink. So engaging targets that are a bit difficult to see is probably the best representation of how an optic actually performs. The fact that it has slightly less parallax and still a very forgiving eye box still does let me use it effectively in the awkward positions around the barricade, probably more so than the Cobra, I will say. Once again, you see me peek around the optic just so I can try to get my bearings again and find the target. Just to be clear, that giant white thing is not the target. That's somewhere off to the left of the target. I'm only taking one. We decided to design the stage with only one, basically one shot per position just to save ammo. I don't have a ton of 7.62x39 to work with. Here is once again lack of brain moment. If I put the handguard, I don't have the space to also see through the optic. If I just prop the barrel on the barricade, I do have the space. So you will have to pretend that what I'm saying now matches what you see on the video. The reason I am doing this after the fact and re-recording what I have said is because, as nice as the background was to look at, unfortunately the wind noise was so awful that it would not have been pleasant for you to listen to. Anyway, the times that we got are a little bit unexpected, frankly, and are not what should have happened. In normal circumstances, I'm more accurate and more faster with any of my optics than I am with iron sights, regardless of the platform. But the wind really conspired to make the irons seem way better than they actually are. And indeed, this is a wind farm positioned in one of the windiest regions in Washington in the windiest season. To no one's surprise, there's a lot of wind, but it's also very inconsistent. Sometimes it's very, very constant and a low pressure, but other times you're getting these huge gusts that are really throwing your aim off. So because of the variability in conditions, I don't think it's possible to make any objective conclusions, but we can at least make some subjective ones based on what I experienced. So starting with the good, the Rakurs has an extremely forgiving eye box. It's very wide, very pleasant for what is actually a prism scope and not a red dot. It has a very nice reticle, which is very sharp and easy to use. It has perfectly clear glass, which does not tint the image in any way like many red dots do. It's built like a tank in all of its Comblot glory. There is nothing really to break. There's no electronics or anything. It is literally just a scope that's there. There's much less parallax too than the Cobra, and it's probably comparable to a more typical, nicer end red dot, and it's much easier to zero than other optics that I've encountered. Basically, just two knobs and that's it. However, the one glaring flaw, which is really what makes this optic quirky, is the fact that there is this bizarre distortion around the outside of the image. I can't really describe it any better than that, other than it really causes problems when you're trying to aim with both eyes, as you should. In order to show you guys why this optic is weird, I took some pictures. I first set the focus to a distant point, somewhat arbitrarily, so that the reticle is in focus, but the stuff in the foreground is a bit out of focus. I then took the same picture, one with the optic in the frame and one with it out of the frame. Let me first flip back and forth between the two. Can you see what's going on here? This surprised me, as I didn't realize that this was what was happening until after I took these pictures. Sometimes you're able to perceive something, but you're not really able to pinpoint what the issue is. Basically, the optic always shifts the image off to the left, or the direction that is 90 degrees clockwise from the top of the optic. It might not seem too bad that this is happening, but we aim with both eyes. This is what it looks like when aiming with both eyes, as you absolutely should be when using a one-time scope. So can you see why you'd lose your target? You get double vision, and it's actually worse trying to aim with this with both eyes than it is trying to aim with a magnified optic with both. For eye fatigue and the retention of peripheral vision, it's absolutely important to use both eyes when aiming with non-magnified optic. The fact that you can't do it with this is a huge deal. For reference, here's the size conquest 1:4 on the 1x setting. First, let's take a look at it back and forth. And now a composite image simulating both eyes. You notice that there is some slight distortion, however, the image, especially in the center where your focus is in the same place. And yeah, that's kind of it. That's the only bad thing. It's a really big bad thing. So it's really going to sort of make or break this optic. I think that this optic is probably one of your better choices if you wanted to do a com block scope for your AK. However, I will say that the PK1 Absor is marginally more expensive, but by all metrics a better, more modern optic without any of the optical distortion. The Rakurs can be extremely difficult to find, however, and so you'd probably end up paying more than this thing is actually worth compared to its non-Russian counterparts. Though, to be fair, if you get a decent red dot and put it on an RS regulate mount, which you should, you'd probably end up paying more. With that said, it may seem like I'm giving a rather unfavorable opinion of this optic, and while it is true that it's probably not the most effective choice out there, this is just for fun, and not every item that you're shooting with has to be min-maxed in order to have a good time. If I wanted a rifle that was optimized for pure efficiency, I wouldn't be using an AKM, to be honest, and I certainly wouldn't be using 7.62x39. It's entertaining, it has a classic early 2000s Russia aesthetic, and it's a great way to play Russian soldier. And it probably won't disappoint you at all if you know what you're getting into. So if you're looking for something cool, but not necessarily something that's solely effective, it's a great choice. It's very durable and it's never going to break on you. I hope you enjoyed this little comparison. We weren't able to be as objective as maybe we would have liked to be just due to environmental factors. We still were able to assess this scope to some degree. And I hope if you're looking at picking up one of these or you're looking at Russian scopes, hopefully this maybe impacted some of your decision making. I'm still working on finding the right formula for presenting this sort of content, so I'm welcoming of any and all feedback. Regardless, hope you enjoyed, and if you have any requests for me to take a look at, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments.